So if you had to think about it, when was the last time you got a raise? What about the last time that you advocated that you yourself got a raise? In my own career, it took me years until I had the confidence to even begin to ask for what I believed that I was worth. Even then, I didn't ask the big figures. And I'm a straight white man. It's a very, very different story for women in the workforce. And the gap between what men and women get paid for the same job in our country of Australia in 2024 is 12%. That is not insignificant. Thankfully, Meggie Palmer's here to help. She's a former foreign correspondent and now heads the tech startup peptalkher.com, which is a platform designed to help women in the workforce advocate for themselves around better conditions, a better career path, and ultimately better pay. Meggie is a powerhouse. I love talking with her. We caught up from a long way away across the Pacific from where she lives in Brooklyn. This conversation just absolutely had me raring to go when it comes to my next negotiation, and I hope it'll do the same for you.
I'm sitting in Sydney. I'm not in my house. I'm not really in my house. Yeah. But there's an 8-ton rock breaker about 7 meters from my microphone going through, I think it's the hardest substance on earth next to Wolverine's bones, is sandstone. And so I'm sitting in the ACAR studios in the middle of Sydney. Where are you?
So it's funny, I live around the corner and I have an office at home, but I've got a 2-year-old. And he has now he's going through that phase, which perhaps you've already been through, of like, I won't go to bed on time anymore and let's scream for 2 hours because that's a fun activity. And so I had a corporate client last night. So I was like in the kitchen, because normally it's fine because he just goes down and he's calm and he's chill. But like, no. So I'm at my co-working space around the corner in Brooklyn, New York.
And I love that at your co-working space in Brooklyn, there's a podcast space.
No. I've just dressed it because, we don't like an ugly situation. I mean, it's not as good as I would have liked. But no, this is just a meeting room.
Well, that's the thing. You did betray your former career there when you used the word set dressed. Yeah. So Pep Talker, obviously I'll do a big intro, but you've had a lot of success with, bringing this issue to light. Mm-hmm. However, finance, particularly equity in pay, particularly, having a long, hard look at the gen pay gap wasn't really where you started, was it?
Mm-mm. No, not at all. I started in the media similar to you. I was a journo, which was kind of a bit of an accident that I became a journo, but I kind of loved it. And then long story short, I had an experience, when I was a journo, and I found out that the dudes in the newsroom who I sat next to, who were my friends, turns out they were getting paid more than me. And it was actually a male ally who fed that up the food chain to let me know. And when I found out, I was obviously pissed off. And so I was kind of raised that if you see something, say something. And so I had a chat because I thought it was a mistake, and then didn't go down so well, shall we say.
Hey, hang on. So what kind of journo? Are you talking so you went to university and everything?
Yeah, I did actually. So I studied, I'm a Queenslander, proud Queenslander from a farm on the Goldie, and then went to the Big Smoke up to Brizzy to QUT where I studied. It was good times. Like university was kind of like my side hustle. My main hustle was like the college vibe, and then I would go in and study business and journalism, and it was awesome. I loved it.
As you're coming to the end of that, do you start to look for where you might go and what you might do?
You know what's so funny? I actually dated this guy randomly, lovely fellow, whatever. Anyway, he was doing an internship at Channel 9, actually in Brisbane, and he told me about it one night.
QTQ.
I was just like coasting through. I was like, la, 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 like let's throw all these parties at college. Like I suppose I'll go to lectures occasionally, whatever. I loved it. I did love it, but I was just more interested in partying. And then I was like, if he's doing an internship, maybe I should really pull my socks up and get my shit together. And so that was what made me realize I need to think about this. I need to have a plan. And so I spoke to one of my lecturers who was super kind and helped me get an internship at Channel 7, went up to Cairns, blah, 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 did work experience. And then it kind of went from there. But it's funny, I never wanted to be a TV journo, but the only reason I liked it was because you got to get out of the office. Because as a print journo, and even when I did radio prac, it was cool, but I could do it from the office. And I loved TV because you had to go and meet people and you got to work with a full crew. And like, I love people. So I love that I worked with a crew and then I got to meet people. And like, I still love that part of,
so you were like what Prime Channel Prime up in Cairns?
It was Channel 7 local back in the day. I worked there with the fabulous Talitha Cummins, Andrew Lund, Kath Turner, who've all gone to be really incredible journalists in their own right. And they were so kind. They like took me out, and Michael Best, they sort of took me under their wing and sort of helped me, and then ended up at Channel 10 in Brisbane and then went from there.
Give us your sign off, because there's always a tagline. Like, I do a fake news show here, right?
Yeah.
And basically, it's the stories of the day, and I throw to a crew of amazing improvisers. They don't know what the story is, and so they essentially tell the story using all the news tropes in the world.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, you're celebrating the opening of the new water park at the Promenade Waterfront in Cairns.
Yeah,
all right? And you've got some overlay of kids.
Yeah.
Wearing their street clothes but just soaked, all right? And that's the overlay you're doing. And the camo say, we're going to start wide and come to you in 3, 2,
we're going to live cross. Go. As you can see, young people frolicking throughout the promenade here today. Cairns has never been in better form. Make sure you get down here, enjoy the festivities. This is Meggie Palmer for Channel 7 Cairns.
Still got it. Still got it.
You know what's so funny about that is like so my name on my birth certificate is Margaret, and I always have gone by Meggie since the day I was born. And so obviously I was like, Meggie, whatever. I had a news director who said to me, Meggie doesn't sound professional enough. You need to go by Meg. So there was like a brief period of maybe like 6 to 12 months where I went by Meg Palmer because I was told it wasn't professional enough. Anyway,
mate, I had a program director who said, nah, you're Andrew G. And that was it.
Is that how you got the nickname? Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Because I said, I was in Adelaide, so I'd really love to just use my own name for it. What's your surname? Ginsberg. And he made this noise. It's Adelaide, and that's pretty Jewish. G. Andrew G. And that was it.
And that was
what he inhaled through his teeth.
And we could talk about the racism and the discrimination that I'm sure we observed and clearly you experienced as well, like in the media. I remember a producer at a network who shall remain nameless, I was trying to pitch a story. I was pitching a story about an Indigenous community, and I thought it was an important story, and it was about young people. Anyway, so it was a great yarn, good pictures, et cetera, which is all important in TV. And he said to me, and I can't even believe these words are going to come out of my mouth, but he said to me, Meggie, no one cares about Black people. And I was like, I beg your pardon? And he said, I'm not going to commission it. None of our viewers care. And I've never forgot. I was so mortified. I think I was speechless when he said that. And I don't remember what I said, but I remember the words that came out of his mouth and like how appalling. And by the way, I'm sure that happened in every newsroom around Australia. Maybe it still happens to this day. I hope not, but it's terrible, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And unfortunately, some of those views, you can't really legislate some of those views away. You just kind of have to wait for those people in power to get moved on by the overall
generational thing,
pressure of the market, really.
Yeah.
I'm probably about 15 years older than you are, but my girlfriend at the time when I was in radio for 5 years before I started on cable TV.
Right.
And I saw firsthand how this incredibly capable, talented, charming, forward-thinking, interesting, very, very clever broadcaster was passed over again and again for no other reason that I could discern other than that she had a vagina. And I'm wondering, this is radio in the 90s in Brisbane, and I'm wondering, did you, before you started thinking about pay gaps and stuff, did you at least see, because, pay is a very private thing.
Sure.
But position inside a company isn't.
Yeah.
And did you start to see disadvantage in the workplace?
I mean, I think still to this day, women, and in particular, folks of color, folks from underrepresented backgrounds, like experience degrees of bias and discrimination every day, right? And I think back and I think, it wasn't that bad, but there was inappropriate advances. There was like minor sexual harassment, I guess, on the spectrum. I was very fortunate in that nothing extraordinarily awful happened to me. It did to some of my friends, but bits of that. And I will also say I also had amazing allies, men and women, who were more senior than me, who really supported me and who championed me for whatever reason. And I'm so grateful for them. and I wouldn't have had the career that I had without them. And, it was interesting. I worked in Australia for a long time, went overseas and was with the BBC World for a while, and then eventually came back into commercial TV and then went to SBS. And I ended my journalism career when I was working at SBS. And my few years when I worked at SBS were the most impactful, most amazing time of my whole career, because I felt like I'd been operating like this, like straight ahead, like there was a mold. And when I got to SBS, I felt like the blinkers had been taken off in terms of how I should tell stories, how I needed to tell stories. Like at SBS, there was a mandate that we didn't do stories, we didn't put shows to air unless we'd spoken to a variety of different cultural perspectives. And I'd never had someone mandate that to me before. And I realized that, before that, my career, I was so black and white about things and it was so boring. And those producers that I worked with who said no one cares about Indigenous stories, they were so wrong. And they were doing such a disservice to the Australian public who wasn't getting this, tapestry of stories that at SBS, still to this day, they do amazing work. And I just am so passionate now about the power of diversity of stories, because it changes hearts and minds. And my experience working there just changed everything for me. And so, yes, of course, there was a little bit of gender discrimination that I experienced. There was a lot that I observed, but I reflect back now and think about, I worked in newsrooms where there was no people of color. There were entirely white newsrooms, and that's unacceptable. It was unacceptable then. It's unacceptable now. And yet that was quote unquote normal. I thought that was okay, and it wasn't. And I sort of, I have a bit of shame and guilt actually around that, because I could have done more and I didn't.
What's for you to do about who hires who in a newsroom? Were you in a position where you could hire people?
No, well, at that point, no, but I could have said something. I could have noticed it. There was one woman at one point, and on reflection, she was really bullied out. And I don't know why. There's one reason that I can think of. Perhaps there were other things going on that I wasn't aware of. But, it's just, it really frustrates me, and it's not fair, because I think about all those kids and all those families who are watching the news and never saw themselves reflected. I don't think that does good things for the tapestry of a society.
I mean, I'm kind of in this transitional phase with my outlook upon this sort of stuff.
Right.
It's somewhat seen as inappropriate for me as a 50-year-old white dude to tell the story of, currently in the, on the cusp of kind of Redfern and Surrey Hills where I'm sitting right now, to tell the story of someone who's living in a housing commission flat 50 metres from here. Yep. It's almost to see as like, well, you're not allowed to tell that person's story. But I have empathy and compassion, and I can understand how shit it would be to have a bus service cancelled and not be able to get from here to there, and that this is really quite terrible, and she's clearly having a bad time. But in recent times, it's been frowned upon for that story to be told believably by me. And I don't know if that's the case.
I think what's changed, and I think what's different from when, you and I were working in the media, however, 10, 15 years ago, I think what's changed from then to now is that we can have these conversations. And whether it's conscious or unconscious in terms of how you're choosing a team, we're seeing and we're hearing and we're learning from more diverse voices, which I personally think is a really good thing. And I think we have to go through that phase where it has to be very intentional. I personally am in favor of things like quotas, because it puts our attention in that direction. Now, it's not to say that someone gets the job because they're a token. It's just that previously, because of the old boys, the old boys club or the old boys network, whatever it is, or the equivalent, that was who we knew. Like, that's who was in our circle or whatever. And so those were the people that we called, that we said, like, let me text someone, let's get someone in here. But when we put our attention and say we need to hear from people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, we need to hear from folks who are immigrants, we need to hear from women, we need to hear from folks who are living with a disability, all of a sudden it's like our peripheral vision opens up. And we're like, oh my gosh, they're amazing. Oh my gosh, he's got an amazing perspective. Yeah. And you just didn't even know to look for them previously because of our own unconscious bias that, by the way, we all have. I bring that, you bring that, the most woke person in the world brings an unconscious bias to the world, right? Yeah. But as we're aware of that, and as we start to have conversations like this, hopefully folks listening as well, all of our awareness can start to improve, so that we just start to maybe ask more provocative questions in a workplace, which is something that I regret not doing when I was younger, or suggesting people, putting people forward, sending specific show reels in, or, being those allies and mentors to folks who are trying to break in and saying, let me be that leg up for you because someone did that for me. And now how can I actually pay that privilege that I now have forward to other people as well?
When it came to getting paid, though, I've actually been in a situation where I did not realize that I was getting paid more than another person that was doing a similar job.
Yep.
Your story of what happened, like, what did it feel like when you discovered that you were getting paid a lot less than someone doing exactly the same job?
Well, I just thought it was a mistake. Like, this is how naive I was. I was like, oh, that's just a paperwork error. Let's just get that sorted out. Like, I was like in my, I don't know, I was like my mid-20s or whatever. I just was like, oh, la, let's just get it fixed. That's just sort of like the bubble of a world that I'd been living in. And when I was like, oh, hey, here's the situation. And they were like, listen, Meggie, if you don't like it, you got two options. You can quit or you can take us to court. And I was like, excuse me? And they're like, yeah, basically suck it up or we'll see you with the lawyers.
I'm guessing this wasn't SBS.
It was not SBS. It was not SBS. I loved my time at SBS. I have such admiration for everyone working there. It was not SBS. And I was just like, are you effing kidding me? Like, oh no, you don't. Because the thing was, I was like, I was honestly like flabbergasted. It takes a lot to render me speechless, but in that moment I was speechless. And then I got really, really pissed off. And I had a bit of a spiral of like, woe is me or whatever. But then I was like, you know what? I didn't have children. I didn't have a mortgage. I had savings. I backed myself. I was like, I will be fine. But if they said this to someone who was pregnant, if they said this to someone who was the breadwinner, they'd be candidly fucked because they'd have to stay there and put up with that behavior. And so I felt very compelled. I did get a lawyer and I felt very compelled to go down that route, not because I wanted to. I tried to be happy families and we tried to mediate and they just didn't engage. Yeah. But I kind of was like, I have to, because I need to kind of draw a line in the sand and be like, do not do this to other people. Now, I'm sure they did. But in my head, I was like, you know, if I stand up to them, maybe they won't. And who knows if it changed anything. But that was just kind of like my thought process of like, I need them to know it's not okay.
You now, through your website, through your work, through your book, you put forth a framework as to how to advocate for yourself. Do you think your framework would have worked?
In that instance, what I could have done better. So basically, I was just very overt that I knew that this was happening to me and I was like, fix it. What I could have done better and what I would encourage folks who may or may not know that they're getting underpaid at this point in time is that, especially for women, we know that when women try to create change from a collective approach, they're more successful. So when it's about me, you're paying me less, fix it. That is not always as successful statistically that if I'm like, hey, do we have a collective challenge here? Should HR look at the equity of everyone's pay? So perhaps what I could have done, or show, is I could have said, hey, there's some chatter in the newsroom. I would love to know if HR's ever done, you know, a balancing of the compensation across all of the roles in our team. That's perhaps what I could have done differently. They might have told me to piss off, who knows? But I could have done that, and maybe then it wouldn't have been, oh my gosh, she's so greedy, she wants to get paid more, and maybe that would have been more of a collective approach to go about it.
What, like to unionize?
Yeah. It's funny. Well, yes. And we were at the time on individual contracts. But yeah, I mean, exactly. There's power in the collective bargaining and big fan of the unions for those reasons as well. But
where I'm recording is around the corner from the CMFEU headquarters. And I don't know if you've been following the news in Australia, but
there's a lot going on there right now that we can unpack as
well.
A
lot going on. And look, I hope they can't hear me from here, but I've seen how great unions can be when I worked in America. Unions are amazingly good. Healthcare, actual fair working conditions, crews that literally walk off the set 10 hours to the second after they walk on. So no one's tired. Everyone can get it done, right? But now, unfortunately, when people think unions, they're thinking this shit.
Yeah, and it's
a real bummer.
And
a real bummer.
And there would be people listening as well who don't have the capacity to join a union, right? Or who don't have that collective bargaining power necessarily. And again, sometimes I've seen this happen as well, and perhaps you have too. Sometimes when people invoke the union in those situations, that can also become a combative, like an escalated thing, for better or worse. But again, there is a consequence sometimes, which is not always positive for the individual who dares to raise it. So it's a challenging issue, and there's no easy answer about it. But I think if we don't, like, some of us have to take courageous steps, especially when we have the capacity and the privilege to do so that eventually that ripple effect, maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get to the point where we do get that tidal wave of change, which is what I think needs to happen. Because the current rate of change, Joshua, they reckon it's going to take, the UN says 200 years before we get to equality. Are you kidding
Between
me?
men and women.
Yeah. And it's, by the way, it's 2024 now. So it's like, what?
200 years is a long time.
Yeah, exactly. We could have lived a whole another 2 lifetimes since then. And so that's like my whole thing is like, I don't want to just like sit around and be like, let's wait another 200 years and see what happens. Fingers crossed, should be good. That's why I reckon actually all of us have the capacity to, in some way, like instigate a shift in mindset in individuals or in organizations. I really believe that.
You said you've got to take some courageous steps. What was the first courageous step that you took when it came to getting equal pay?
The first courageous step was probably when I had that conversation. I would say that was an example of a courageous conversation where I didn't just roll over and accept what was given, which was the intention and which was at the time what was certainly expected of me. Yeah. I think it was expected of everyone, and I think there was a hyper expectation on the women's staff that you accept what you get. You get what you get and you don't get upset. That was kind of like, you should be lucky to have a job. If you don't take this role, we've got 30 other people who will line up behind you and kind of happily take on the role. And so I think going against the grain. But to be honest, I had a lot of practice at that. Like I've always been that kid who debated. I've always been pissed off when things were unfair. So that was kind of like built into my DNA, I guess, from a young age. And so it didn't really feel courageous at the time. I think there's a lot of people obviously doing much more courageous things. But to some extent, people that, men and women who have to have these hard conversations and point out these inequalities, it's not easy, right? And there's often a consequence.
Yeah. When it comes to, the gender pay gap, which is clearly not there.
Yeah,
it's clearly there. There's the kind of arguments that it doesn't exist from a part of the onlineosphere that I don't know if I take seriously about anything, but they say it really convincingly. So it sounds like it's real, but I know it's kind of not. And there's some critique of it from people who I truly, really respect and really trust that I go, oh, hang on, what's happening?
Can you give me some examples? Like, is that people who are kind of pushing back against the idea of why it exists?
Yeah. Like factoring particularly things like, childcare and time away and things like this, that there is a bit of a leveling out of some things. Now, I'm not saying in any way, shape or form that childcare is not an actual proper job. It is a hard freaking job, and you only have to look at how much money you need to pay someone to do it for you for a day.
Right.
Someone that you could expect your child back alive at the end of the day. To understand how fucking valuable that is, right?
Yeah.
So how does one address the arguments, the kind of more rational arguments against the pay gap?
So I totally get what you're saying. So basically there's a lot of, and I deal with this all the time, there's a lot of people who are like, the gender pay gap is fake news, it's totally bullshit, it's conflated, whatever. So there's a bunch of factors that contribute to the gender pay gap. So let's break it down and just like kind of strip some of those things out. So it is true that women throughout the course of our career, we're more likely to take time off, right? Because of children, because of elder care, whatever. So we do take more time on average out of the workforce. That is 100% factually true from the statistics. And we can strip that out of the data, right? So depending on what country you live in, the gender pay gap sits somewhere between sort of like 10 to 11 up to 20-ish%. In Australia, it's about 13, 14%, right? The difference between the average earning of men and women in that particular industry, right? So that's approximately where we're sitting. And so you can strip out the fact that, yes, Maggie's a journalist. However, she has a 2-year-old, so she took 12 weeks out of the workforce. So, she's therefore less experienced, blah, blah, blah. You can strip that out. So let's take that out. There's still a gap, right? And then the other thing is that women are socialized, girls are socialized from a really young age, and women, to be more predisposed to certain roles. So we're more likely to want to become teachers or nurses or whatever, or society pushes us in that direction. And we know that those roles historically have been paid less than, say, engineers, bankers, doctors, and lawyers, right? Which traditionally have had less women in the industries, right? So that's also true that as women go into an industry, in fact, the average wage goes down. You can also statistically account for those choices or, as I said, social conditioning for those particular job choices. So we can strip that out of the data too. So we can remove the fact that we take time out, and we can remove the fact that we are more likely to go into feminized jobs which pay less. So you can do both of those things, and there's still a gap. Right? There's still a gap. I was at a summit recently with a bunch of Harvard professors who were talking about this exact thing that you're mentioning. So it's that gap that I find most interesting. It's not as big So your contacts and your friends are correct. It's not as big when you account for both of those things. That is true. But that remaining gap, they hypothesize that that's unconscious bias and or discrimination. That's all we can put that final gap down to.
Well, both of those things we could definitely do something about, which is good.
We would hope, but to your point earlier, it's a generational thing. And here's a fun/unfun fact, right? So there's been 3 different studies in 3 countries that's shown that little kids.
I'm flinching already. You haven't even got to the punchline.
It's pretty rank. It's pretty rank this time. So little girls get less pocket money than little boys. So the gender pay gap starts at 8 years old. Now, parents are not assholes, obviously. They're not intentionally doing it. But again, it comes back to what have we been conditioned to think. So from a young age, we've been taught that if you chop wood or you mow the lawn, that is quote unquote hard work, right? If you set the table, if you support with laundry duties, I'm generalizing here, of course, but if you do that, that's kind of that's cute and that's nice, but it's not as tough, right? And so we actually see that this gap sneaks in then. And so, of course, it's perpetuated and it continues to get worse as we become adults as well.
I'm fascinated to know, there's a few men in my life that have husbands.
Yep.
There's most definitely an unconscious bias in all of the 3 men I'm thinking of, and there's most definitely discrimination against them.
According to the Human Rights Campaign, gay men do earn less than heterosexual men, right? So there is a pay gap that is disadvantaged gay men as well, which makes sense when we think about the fact that, yes, the gender pay gap is bad for women, but it is much worse for Black women. It is much worse for Indigenous women. It's much worse for Hispanic and Asian women, right? And so it tracks that on the male side as well, that folks from underrepresented groups are also experiencing that same unconscious or conscious bias and discrimination. There is gender pay gap data specifically looking at women who identify as lesbians, for example. And as I understand it, the gap is slightly less, but it exists still. But it's not as bad. As I understand it, certainly I have seen a piece of data on this that specifically looked at lesbians, but I'm not sure more broadly than that. But it'd be interesting.
Let's start with employees. How do people that sit in this office, for example, the female employees here who are all ass-kicking salespeople and they do the job, trust me. How do they address this?
Yeah, so I think everyone, men and women, however you identify in a workplace, the first thing is to your earlier point, we were talking about very earlier in the interview about how you're a curious person. So I think everyone can be curious at work and ask questions. So if you're interviewing for a new sales representative, if you're interviewing for an intern, whatever it is, you can ask the question, say, hey, what does the diversity look like of the candidates on the shortlist? It's not aggressive, whatever, it's just a question. If there's a panel of folks who are interviewing prospective candidates, again, you can say, hey, just wanting to check if we got some diversity on the panel who are doing the interviews themselves, right? Because if you have an all-male panel and equally an all-female panel, perhaps that's not going to be fair for all candidates, right? So that's one thing that we can do. The other thing is that you can advocate and ask questions to say, hey, what are the pay bands? Do we have transparent pay bands? What is HR's practice around doing a compensation benchmark in the organization? So asking those questions is really powerful, and also being an ally and advocating for people in your team. I think one of the most radical things that we can all do is start to talk about cash and money. Because I was raised in fairly traditional, Queensland family, and you didn't really talk about cash. That was kind of a bit rude and a bit on the nose. You didn't really talk about what your paycheck said. Now, I'm not saying we all put it on our Instagram, profile. Equally, I think it is kind of radical but exciting to have a conversation this weekend with your mates about, hey, here's my salary expectations. Here's the range of money that I'm earning and here's what I'd love to be earning. Let's start to have that conversation, because actually in sharing that openly, you may give someone else permission to start to dream that could be possible for them, right? Because if you've never met someone who earns 6 figures, you don't have any role models to even know that that's an option. And all of a sudden, if people start to share that and say, did you know that Joanne's earning this or Duncan did this, whatever, it allows people, again, to kind of take the blinkers off about what could be possible for them and what they could maybe dream to start to ask for one day.
So you're saying when you're sitting there in an interview, if you say, what's a way that I could ask that? Because if I start asking, what are the pay bands? Or if I start, have you done what did you say, a recalibration or rebalancing of the... If I said to them, look, I've had a situation in my employment before where I found out that I was getting paid more for the same job than a female colleague, and it was a big problem. Can you help me make sure that doesn't happen here?
I mean, like 10 out of 10.
Is that the sort of question I could ask? Okay.
And that takes a lot of courage, right, for you, because that's not an easy thing to say necessarily. Like, okay, maybe it's, but there's a potential, it could rub some people the wrong way, right? It's not always an easy conversation. And so that's why I say, like, it is important that we kind of step into a place that makes us awkward and uncomfortable. I mean, we've heard the stories, in Hollywood of stars who've started to openly say that they won't work unless they know their co-stars are getting paid equally, or making sure that they can split the salary so that it's fair and reasonable. Yeah. But the reality is, it is a PR risk for the person who does get paid disproportionately more, right? And sometimes there's reasons for that. I'm not saying that people can't get paid different rates. They can. Sometimes there's reasons for it. But actually, by being an ally, like that example you just gave, that's pretty game-changing, because it also sets an expectation for the management team that, oh my gosh, we got to take this seriously, because he's put it on the table, so we can't say that we didn't know. It goes to values and character. And I understand that there's people listening who maybe don't feel that they have that political capital within their organization to have these conversations, because, if you lose your job, it could be very disastrous. So I understand that there's different levels that we're all at in terms of how comfortable are we having these conversations. But I think it's important to put it out there and kind of raise it as you get to that point. Like, I would encourage you to get a bit uncomfortable and maybe, obviously sense check it with some mates if that's helpful. Practice having the conversation beforehand, so you can sort of crowdsource how it's going to have the most impact and also hopefully the lowest consequence for you, right? But I do think we have to be brave and step out on the ledge a little bit for the sake of what I believe is the greater good.
I don't make this podcast by myself. There's about 4 or 5 people that I hire to do help me run everything. Yeah. And in 1 or 2 of the roles, we've had a bit of turnover in the last year and a half. Through nothing but circumstances, right? Hiring people sucks.
Oh, it's the worst. I hate it. I'm not very good at it. I wish I was better at it.
So to flip that around, you mentioned, you don't want people to be pressured and to feel that they might, put their employment at jeopardy. But what do you want people to know about how much power they actually have, when it comes to the value of their retention in a role?
Well, and you and I both know, like you've just mentioned, you've gone through some turnover. I've gone through some turnover recently. It's a nightmare. Like, as a leader, when your staff leave or change or get other opportunities, obviously you're happy for them, but it's a nightmare for you, because it's like an extra stress, it's extra time. There's that institutional knowledge that's then going to leave the podcast or the business or whatever. And so actually, as an employer, unfortunately, we can't pay everyone $1 million, or not yet, maybe one day, fingers crossed. However, we do want to pay people fairly, so that firstly, they feel excited and stoked to work hard for us. And secondly, so that they're not like 24/7 on the side looking for something else. Because actually, we don't want that either. So I think often we think, oh, the big boss or the big company, they've got all this power. Okay, sure, they have the power to give you a job or not. Equally, they're not a charity. Like, they're not hiring you to be nice. They're hiring you because you need someone to write the intros for this podcast. You need someone to book the guests. You need someone to do the audio mix. Like, there's a reason for that, because if they don't do that, your sponsors don't pay you, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a value as well. So what I would say is, for everyone listening, like, you have a value that you are contributing, and it's your job to understand what is that value. Specifically, what does that look like? And that's a big part of the reason why we built the Pep Talker app, is so that people can start to quantify that. Like, it's not enough to say, I'm a great, audio mixer, or I'm a great salesperson. Like, okay, that's nice and that's cute and that's good, but it's more powerful if you say, I'm a really impressive salesperson. I increased revenue 17% year on year at my previous company. I started an intern program, and, I also found a way to get a local restaurant to sponsor a dinner every week to take clients out, saving the company $700 a month. If you can quantify it in that granular detail, all of a sudden, we understand your value. We understand the dollars and cents and how it's going to impact our bottom line. And so it's a much easier conversation, right?
One of the most powerful things I ever learned about negotiation was from an Aussie bloke working for a mining company in Utah, actually. Yeah, he said, always ask for stuff that it is nothing for them to give. And he talked about this particular mining company he worked for. They were big. Yeah. And they had, their bill with Qantas would have been 10, 12 million a year.
Whoa.
So because he's in Utah, he said, I want 2 business class return tickets from Salt Lake City to Perth twice a year. They went, oh yeah, what else? Because it was fucking nothing for them to ticket.
But that's
and
like
say
20,
yes.
30K for him value post-tax for his family, right? Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah. That mental gymnastics that he had done ahead of time for the negotiation, that's the key, right? So you should be asking about your pay and compensation every single year. They might not say yes every single year, but it is very reasonable for you to bring it up and have like a really candid conversation in a respectful way every year, of course, as long as you're bringing receipts, as long as like, and here's why, because of look at these awards, look at this value, etc. And also, you know, obviously right now with the economy, bit hit and miss for some people right now. Okay, you're not necessarily going to get the pay increases that you would love. What else can you get? To your point, maybe it's flights. Can you work from home on a Friday? Can you start at 11 a.m. on the Tuesday because you want to learn the cello? Can you get free parking? Would they be happy to, you know, reimburse you for your $20 a week parking? I've got clients who get their companies to pay for their pet insurance. Will they pay for an executive coach? You know, for you to join a membership like the Pep Talker community or like a certain higher educational institution program or something like that. Like what else is possible? Even when you're starting a job, one thing that I find a lot of people don't know, Osher, is that like you can actually, yes, you can negotiate your salary, but also a lot of companies are quite happy to pay a signing bonus because it comes off the books once and that's it. It's never a recurring thing. So thinking about those things ahead of time as well can actually add like tens of thousands of dollars to your pocket. But they've actually got a pool of money where they're happy to pay that, you know?
So, you know, if the spreadsheets are big enough, there's the wages.
Exactly.
As an expenses column.
One bucket. Yep.
But then there's also over here, they've got, well, the wages is pretty empty, but as far as professional development, there's actually some budget there.
Totally.
So
you want to do a public speaking course, you want to whatever, you know, like, I mean, the other thing I used to negotiate back when I was a journo, we got pretty good annual leave, but one year I asked for a raise and they gave me something, but not everything. And I was like, look, how about you and I just have a wink, wink, nudge, nudge agreement that I'll also take an extra 10 days of vacation over Christmas and we just won't put it on the books and everyone's a winner. And they're like, yeah, it's totally fine. Who cares? So like I got
Were you negotiating with an American company?
No, this one was an Australian one actually.
Wow.
So I was being greedy because I already got pretty good holidays. But they were like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, sure. You know, and so like that has value in and of itself, right? And so thinking about the non-monetary benefits, but you can't expect them to like just give it to you on a platter. I mean, fingers crossed you have an amazing boss who does that. But the reality is like bosses and leaders, you know, they've got sick kids, they're getting divorced, they've got Netflix shows to watch. There's a lot happening. And so if you can come to the table super prepared and make it easy for them to go, oh yeah, tick, 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 sure, happy days, let's keep going, then it's sort of a no-brainer for them.
I think the other thing that perhaps employees don't understand often is the longer you're there, the value that you have, as you mentioned earlier, in the institutional knowledge.
1000%.
That is, they haven't just invested in you with the wages and whatever professional development and parking and pet insurance.
Yeah.
They have the longer you're there, the more amount of teeth, the gear that you are in the machine of the business is.
Yeah.
All right. And you
100%.
become more and more integral to everything working. I mean, just when you come back from your 10 days break, when you hear people go, fuck, I'm glad you're back. It's because when you're not there, shit falls apart.
Totally.
And it is that your employer will know that.
Yeah.
If they don't know that, you need to show them that. You need to literally, I have, it's funny, you mentioned it earlier, bring the receipts. When we're going to a radio negotiation, I've negotiated a couple of my big radio deals by myself.
Have you?
I remember going to one particular, I remember I had a negotiation coach. It was amazing.
Did you? That's cool. Good for you.
Yeah, it was real cool.
That's awesome.
Actually, I connect you with him. He's in Amsterdam.
That.
He's fucking,
I
met him when I was at business school. He's cool as shit. And I remember I literally walked into it with magazine covers.
Oh, like
this is
literal receipts, like IRL.
Yeah,
like here's the proof.
Like 20 years ago, when I was going for this, I was going for this radio job, going, you're not going to pay me that because this, and I was terrified, and I shouted out, double the biggest number I could think of, and he said yes, like that. And then, in the moment after he said yes, I was like, fucker, he had more.
Should have gone more. Damn it. As soon as the number came out of your mouth, don't you hate that when that happens? Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to that, yeah.
But it was another one I did. And this is, to be fair, I did a lot more homework the next time I did one for a similar company.
Yeah.
I did heaps of homework around what's the revenue of the business? How much do they
1000%.
charge for advertising?
Yep.
How much revenue is the show I'm working on actually bringing in? What is my role in that show? What percentage of the overall, P&L of that show do I represent? What is it without me?
Yep.
And then this time around, I put the big figure in, and they said yes again. So I might have got my sums wrong.
But it's so true though. But that's the thing. It's like, research is so boring. Preparation is so boring. Like, I wish I could say, like, here's a magic salary pill. Take that and you'll be sweet. Like, it's you got to just like put in the work. If you're going in for a $500 a year pay rise, I'm pretty sure everyone listening will be fine. Good luck. You'll be great. But if you're going in, if you want an extra 3K, if you want an extra 13 grand, 30, 50, I've had a couple of clients get like 6-figure pay increases in 1 year. Like, it's insane. If you want that, you got to do the work. Like, to your point, you got to crunch the numbers. You got to be tracking your successes, which is why we built the app. Like, you've got to understand what is your value literally and tangibly to that business. If you do not take this job, or if you leave, what walks out the door with you? And if you take $200 million of clients with you to another agency, you better believe that they'll be paying what you want. And so making it really easy and doing that preparation, you kind of got to like Nancy Drew detective the whole situation. You've got to understand like what is the economics of it right now, the share price, what's, the federal government changing legislation that's going to tip everything on its head. You've got to sort of do that peripheral vision, like get beneath the iceberg, beneath the surface, like to kind of really understand it. Because when you've got that context, you negotiate from a place of power. And so one of the things that and I don't know if you did this with your coach as well, one of the things I always talk about is like the 3 W's of negotiation, like the WWW, like the wish, the want, and the walk. So like you mentioned the OMG, I can't believe I said that number out loud figure. That's like your wish. Like, you want to think about it, everyone who's listening can like just think about this bananas number and then like think about a bigger one, and whatever you're thinking about, add GST at least, right? So that's like your wish number out on one end. And then if we want to slide down the scale to the other end is your walk number. So you're like, that's a number where it's like, I cannot get out of bed for less than this because childcare, food, car repayments, mortgage, whatever. Or just like, you're like, I got paid this much when I was like 10 years younger. I'm not doing it. Right. So you got to understand what's that walk figure. And then if that's what they offer you or whatever, you either say no or you take it because you need to and keep looking for something else. Right. So whatever that number is. And then the want number is the number where you're like, you know what? I'd be stoked to work hard for this amount of money. And I think that feels like a fair exchange. So if you've got those 3 numbers in your back pocket, then when you go in, you can kind of more easily you can sort of riff up and down depending on their vibe. I mean, ideally, if you can get them to anchor. I love to tell people always also to talk about like, how can you throw out a number without throwing out a number? So like, listen, this job sounds really interesting. I'm so impressed with the team. I'm super well compensated where I am right now. I'm really happy they look after me, which is amazing. I feel so valued there. So I'd love to understand, what have you budgeted for this role? So you're kind of like implying, dang, I am such a baller. Like, if you miss out on me, like, good luck. But you also haven't given them a number, right? You're trying to get them to come to the party. So then that way you can use your wish, want, walk figure to sort of figure out where you go.
It is important to know, though, they have a wish, want, walk as well.
1,000%. 1,000%. And that's the tango, isn't it? That's the dance. And then they want you, but then you don't want to overshoot because also that if they've got 100,000 for the role and you throw out 250, then they don't want you to be unhappy with the 100,000 that they've got, right? Because then they're going to think you're not going to stay very long. So it is a challenging dance, and that's where the research and like, obviously you can Google it, but also like talking to real people, which you found out in your American negotiations, like understanding there's certain salaries and stuff that is not on Glassdoor. Like, you really have to know people in the industry to kind of give you a sense of what's realistic.
Yeah, I most definitely, I have had a wish and a want and a walk figure that were all the same number, and it was 2.5 more than I should have been getting. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, and I angrily faxed it off and then didn't hear anything for 3 days. And then I got a text message from someone adjacent saying, I think they're going to go in another direction, mate. I just literally blew myself out. I destroyed, because I did not do my research. I just did not have my own humility. You have to understand it. how much are they actually going to pay me? Like, what's my ego telling me I'm worth?
Right. Having that understanding.
What's the actual market rate? Like, be smart about this.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'd love $1 million for a gig. That's a nice round number.
Be great.
Beauty. Our market rate's 106. I'm not going to get my $1 million.
No, exactly. And it's really hard to know. And one of the things, body language experts talk about this all the time. Like, if you can have the conversation in person or at the very least on a video call, it's really powerful because you'll be able to say things like, listen, I was thinking north of 6 figures, and you can straight away see what is their face doing. Are they like, or are they like, as if, like you want to be able to pick up on those non-verbal cues as well. So that again, you can be like, obviously though, very keen to understand your creative genius, so let's make it work. You can kind of like straight away like figure out a way to find a consensus.
The third W, it sounds fun to say, walk.
Yeah.
But man, when we need a job, we need a job. What would you say to people about the walk?
Yeah, we do need a job, and we can have a whole nother conversation on like I'm a huge fan of having a plan B. I think you've always got to have a plan B. If you're an entrepreneur like we are, if you've got a big corporate fancy job at a big company that's never going to go under, guess what? Sometimes you end up on the front page of the AFR for the wrong reason, and a whole bunch of jobs get lost. Right. So I think you always have to have options, because also, firstly, it's good practice. But secondly, it means that you then approach your work from a different energy, because all of a sudden you're like, I love this job and I want to be here. But if it's not feeling good and if you're not respecting me, I also have the energy where I'll go to that door if I need to and if I want to. I mean, we could talk a whole bunch about like savings and having those financial plans as well, which I appreciate is not possible for everyone. But yeah, having that mindset to, there are always other options for you. It might be very difficult. It might take you some time, but know that there's people in your life and in the world and community who want to support you. If you're in a toxic situation, if something is happening that's illegal, there's people that can support you through that, truly. Please lean on your friends and family as well, by the way, because they want the best for you too. But surrounding yourself with a village makes that process of, do I stay or do I go? How do I afford to stay or go? It makes that whole process a little less stressful and more manageable, right? Like, we just need to know that there's options. And if I took this step and then this step and then this step, maybe this would be possible.
Understanding that you've got somewhere else to go.
Totally.
Gives you that power.
It does.
Also understanding that it's okay to take a gig that might not be everything that you want, but what it does give you in the non-monetary terms might be the time to, on your own dime, develop something else about yourself, get yourself ready for the next thing.
Yeah.
There are people in my life, very successful people, who are operating at about 45% of their capacity. And I keep calling them, going, come on, let's do this thing. And they're like, my kid's only going to be 12, 13
amazing.
Once.
Yeah, right.
Nah, I can't do it. And I'm living here in these standards right now for this amount of time because I cannot buy that time with this kid to make sure I can shepherd them through this part of their life. Yeah. And it's epic. I'm disappointed because I can't do a thing with them. Yeah. But I'm like, fuck yeah.
Well, the idea of seasons, right? Like, there's seasons in your life. There's seasons where you want to burn the candle at both ends. There's seasons when you need to recover, like from a personal or a professional failure or trauma or whatever the case may be. And I think also, like, I love what you just said. Like, it's okay to be at 45% sometimes. And sometimes you might take a job and you're like, it's too easy, it's too junior. But you know what? I can do my 7.5 hours a day. And I can just like rest and recuperate and maybe be creative on the side, or just start to think about what could that look like again. And again, I know it's a privilege to even be having these conversations, but thinking about the fact that it doesn't have to be like that forever, right? And I love the idea of taking like the road less traveled and sometimes going off the beaten path. Let's just see what happens. Because I didn't figure that I would start a tech company and move to New York. Like, that's so random. But like, here I am, and like, I don't regret it, and it's amazing. It's a journey every day. So I feel like sometimes taking the road less traveled can lead you to even cooler places than you could imagine.
What's the situation in Australia when it comes to discussing your pay? Because in most of my contracts, it says you can't tell anyone what these deals are.
So quite right. So they actually overturned that legislation recently. So those, I used to have the same clauses in my contracts as well. A lot of the big banks have those clauses in there. They now are not enforceable or cannot be in contracts anymore. So now you can actually be candid with your colleagues. So that's changed, though. It's only in the last year or two. So it is a new legislative change that they did, the feds did in Canberra recently. Yeah, because it's interesting. Those pay secrecy clauses were outlawed in the United States and the UK quite a long time ago, but Australia's just come to the party too, which is awesome. And so, but a lot of us have these hangovers because we used to have contracts that said that, so we kind of are still fearful of that. But you can comfortably talk about your salary now, in theory, without fear of reprisal. And again, we also know, by the way, it's also illegal to pay women less. And I know from firsthand experience, and lots of your listeners know, it happens anyway. So again, it's just understanding that, like, even though, sure, you could get a lawyer and sue them and say, well, I was allowed to talk about it, but you just want to do it in a way that, again, I just don't want anyone like having super negative consequences as a result of that. But in theory, you can absolutely talk about it, which is good because it means that we're taking away the secrecy around it, which is especially good for women and underrepresented groups because they're most likely to have the negative repercussions of those clauses. So it's a really good step in the right direction for sure.
Meggie, I know you're never going to do it, but let's just say Simon Holmes of Court swings in on a rope made of bed sheets with a dagger between his teeth and says, moving back to Australia, you're going to go for the seat of whatever it is on the Goldie. You're going to be a teal. And you become...
I love it.
Well, you're a perfect candidate because, you know, if you look at their casting process, you fit it. Trust me, I've spoken to 3 of them. And you become Minister for Women in Australia.
Yeah, right.
What's the first thing you do?
Wow, what a great question. And clearly I haven't been thinking big enough because I haven't given this a lot of thought. I think the first thing that I would do is listen. The first thing that I would do is listen. So I would go out, I would want to start with young women in particular because obviously I want to change the hearts and minds at that level. So I'd want to be talking to educators, I'd want to be talking to teachers, to schools, to childcare workers, and I would want to understand what they need, what they're seeing, and how we could help support them so that the next generation of men and women, by the way, can be amazing advocates and amazing change makers going forward. So I think that's where I would start, would be with young people and understanding from the people who deal with them at the coalface as to what they think is necessary for change. But what a great question that I clearly need to ponder. Further.
So you become Minister for Women.
Yeah.
Let's take the largest unpaid gig in Australia. Mm-hmm. You become Minister for Women at the next election.
Yeah.
What do you do about childcare?
I guess if I had unlimited budget, there's a lot that I would do about childcare. And I'm also a realist in the sense of I understand, you know, budgetary restrictions and stuff like that. But let's assume that I've got unlimited budget. I would follow the...
Give us your wish, your what, and your walk.
Give us the wish, what, and walk of the childcare solution for Australia. Yeah. I would follow the Scandinavian model, right? Which is basically state-funded childcare, which also has, by the way, among the lowest gender pay gap in the world because men and women are equally supported and are mandated, by the way, to take equal parental leave if they want to access their paid parental leave. So they get very generous. I think it's 12 months of paid parental leave. However, if they want to access that, both partners need to take equal time out of the workforce, hence reducing that gender pay gap based on that. Yeah, so I would be looking to the Scando. So perhaps the first thing I would do would be either fly them to me or fly to them to just sort of get the download and look at the research, right, of what examples have worked really well. And it is in Scandinavia where we're seeing the most success. I would want state-funded childcare. At the very least, I would want childcare to be a tax deduction because I think that that's fair and reasonable. And the thing is, like, we need more women back in the workforce, right? Because in terms of GDP growing, we need to have more participation in the workforce and supporting families to know that their children are safe and cared for and nurtured while they're contributing to the economy is one of the most important things we can do to change that.
We talked about employees, but for employers who they want to do the right thing, what can employers have a look at? How can they address unconscious bias that they may not realise they have? What are some questions they can ask themselves?
What they can do is they can do a pay audit to start with, right? And if they're one of the big employers, they will already be doing that because they're mandated to do that with the Women and Gender Equality Agency in Australia. In the UK, they're mandated to report as well. There's no compulsory reporting in the United States, but they can do a benchmarking of like, what is happening with our data right now? What are the numbers telling us? And then actually, you know, one of our clients over here is Salesforce. And what they actually do is every single year, they re-benchmark. And every single year, again, they're trying to do the right thing. Every single year, a little bit of that gap creeps back in. Again, it's not because they're bad humans necessarily, it's because of that unconscious bias. And as humans, we are fallible. We offer John, 87 and we offer Joan 85 and it's not a big deal. And yet every year with inflation, whatever, that gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the biggest thing is consistency and awareness and just being open to having these conversations. I mean, like transparent pay bands, transparent salary advertising is really powerful too, because then it just keeps everyone on the same page.
It'd be wonderful if when you're talking these really big companies that everybody hired, like the Berlin Philharmonic hired that amazing story. Do you know that story?
Yeah. The blind audition. Yeah.
Amazing. For people who don't know the story, is that
awesome.
They had a look at the orchestra of like 118 people. That's a big orchestra. They're like, a lot of dudes. And so they're like, all right then. And so they basically put a bed sheet in the middle of the stage and everyone walked out completely unseen by the conductor and the other people that were making the call. And they were to walk out on stage without shoes, because you can tell what kind of shoes someone's wearing by the way they walk.
Stiletto versus a flat,
And look, what do you reckon happened to the gender makeup of the orchestra after that casting session?
Yeah.
What do you know? It was 50-50.
Isn't it fascinating though?
It's wild, isn't it?
I mean, perhaps I should revisit my previous answer. Maybe if I became Minister for Women, the first thing I'd do is every job interview there had to be a sheet and your voice had to be altered. Maybe that would change things.
Hey, that's Pep Talk Her, the app. That's the extra. That's when you do the live AI avatar.
Yeah, and that's how you interview. There we go.
That's how you interview. That could be really interesting. At what point do you want young women to start, looking into this kind of stuff? Maybe getting the app and having a look. And at what point could it be useful for them?
Listen, any age, as we talked about, at the age of 8, the gender pay gap is starting. And I think awareness of this is important at any age. I mean, we have men that use the app. It's mainly women, but we do have men that use the app as well. What is the age in Australia? 14 and 9 months still when you could start to get a job. And often at that age, right, you're going into, I went to Hungry Jack's. So, it's very structured in terms of what the pay is.
Yeah.
But still it's an awareness. And it's awareness to if there's an opportunity to go for drive-through and you get paid more on drive-through, why wouldn't you put yourself up for that? And you can keep a track of all the positive stories of, in the kitchen and the customer service that you can then put forward when you're talking to your manager as to why you'd like to be considered. So I personally don't think it's ever too young, Osha. I think at any age, we can start to teach little girls and little boys to understand the value that they bring, to understand the power of tracking and recognizing their successes and writing them down, not just for when they negotiate, but also for their own mindset. Because I'm sure you and I have both, I know that we've both had moments in our career where we've spiraled in a negative way, and actually tracking positive feedback and not listening to the haters or the one bad piece of feedback actually is like a muscle. It's if I go to the gym and I do these, if I flex my bicep or whatever once or twice ever at the gym, I'm not going to have super toned arms, right? But if I do it once a week for 2 years, 3 years, all of a sudden these are massive biceps that are strong and that are rivaling Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? So it's kind of you want to do the same thing for your neural pathways. You want to focus on where is the value that I add? What are people telling me are my strengths? How can I focus on that so that when that negative feedback or that constructive feedback inevitably comes, you're able to better handle that and reframe your mindset more quickly so you don't spiral as I unfortunately have done several times in my career.
I'm so happy I got a chance to speak to you. And if you want, you can absolutely tell your family that, no, it went a long time to, I don't know, just sit quietly in your co-working space.
Yeah, not go back
by yourself.
To my screaming 2-year-old. Yeah. I'm not going to take myself for dinner on my own. What bliss that would be. I'm in the season of having dinner on my own once a week. That's my current professional season. I'll go home and tell Ryan.
With a book. Yeah, just take a book.
Yeah,
just read a book. Have dinner by yourself and read a book.
Yeah, maybe I will. There's a great pizzeria
Don't scroll
downstairs.
through your phone.
No.
Don't look at shit on your phone. Just read something.
Actually, one of my dear friends, Adam Bavino, who's an amazing cameraman in Sydney, he actually taught me to go to dinner and leave your phone at home. And
it's a very good one.
Just own it. And what a great thing to do. It's kind of radical in this day and age, isn't it? To do that and have dinner on your own without a phone.
Meals taste delicious if you don't take a picture of them.
They sure do. And you might just strike up a conversation with someone who may or may not open the next professional door for you. Who knows?
There's that as well.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So nice to chat with you.